It was a quiet afternoon in a small town when a group of loud bikers rolled into a local diner parking lot. Among the customers enjoying a peaceful meal was 94-year-old Frank, a decorated World War II veteran. Frank, known for his kind demeanor and quiet strength, had seen more in his lifetime than most could imagine. But today, his patience was put to the test. The bikers, full of swagger and mischief, singled Frank out, mocking his age and frail appearance. At first, Frank calmly brushed off their taunts, but when they pushed further, the atmosphere grew tense. What the bikers didn't know was that Frank wasn't as alone as he seemed. With a steady hand, he pulled out his phone and made one simple call. What happened next left everyone speechless, and it's a moment no one in that diner would ever forget. As Frank ended his call, the bikers laughed, brushing off the veteran's quiet resolve. To them, he was just another easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back. But there was something in Frank's calm demeanor that unsettled a few of the other diners. It was as if he knew something they didn't. Frank had lived through battles most couldn't imagine, and his life had been a testament to resilience. While the bikers leaned on their motorcycles, trading crude jokes and sneering at passersby, Frank sat back in his chair, his eyes steady and unwavering. The call had been brief, just a few words spoken in a calm, deliberate tone, but it had set something in motion. Outside, the rumble of bikes echoed through the parking lot, masking the faint sound of approaching vehicles. What exactly Frank had planned was anyone's guess, but the atmosphere had shifted, and the bikers were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. The air outside grew thick with anticipation as Frank sat silently, his expression unreadable. The bikers, still oblivious to the shift in mood, continued their antics, revving their engines and drawing attention. A few customers peered out the diner's windows, curious but cautious. Frank remained calm, his weathered hands resting on the table, a quiet confidence radiating from him. Then, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot, followed closely by a few other vehicles. They parked with purpose, their movements precise, almost practiced. A tall man in a crisp uniform stepped out of the lead vehicle. His eyes scanned the scene, landing on Frank, who gave a subtle nod. The bikers' laughter faltered as more figures emerged, each wearing a quiet authority that couldn't be ignored. It was clear they weren't ordinary visitors. Conversations inside the diner hushed as everyone watched the scene unfold, wondering just who Frank had called, and why. The lead man from the SUV approached Frank with a firm handshake and a respectful nod, calling him Colonel, in a tone that left no doubt about his deep admiration. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado starting to waver. The uniformed man turned to face the group, his voice steady but commanding. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his gaze sharp and unyielding. The bikers, caught off guard, stumbled over their words, trying to maintain their tough demeanor. But their confidence faltered further as more of Frank's unexpected allies stepped forward. They weren't just any group. They were younger veterans, men and women who had served under Frank's leadership years ago. Their presence alone spoke volumes about the kind of man Frank was. The tension in the parking lot was palpable. Frank, still seated, finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, you picked the wrong fight today." The bikers' cocky smirks faded completely, replaced with unease as the realization of who they were dealing with began to sink in. The leader of the bikers, a burly man with a tattooed arm and a defiant sneer, took a step forward, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "So what? You called your friends." "We're not scared," he said, his voice louder than necessary, betraying a hint of nervousness. His crew rallied behind him, though their postures were less confident than before. Frank stood slowly, his movements deliberate, and for the first time, the bikers noticed the way everyone else deferred to him. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who commanded respect without saying much. "I didn't just call my friends," Frank replied, his tone low but firm. "I called my family." At that moment, another car pulled into the lot, its doors swinging open. Out stepped an older man in a sheriff's uniform and two deputies. The sheriff, a familiar face to Frank, walked over with a grim expression. "Got your call, Colonel," he said, addressing Frank as if by rank. "Looks like we've got a situation to handle." The bikers exchanged panicked glances now, realizing they weren't just outnumbered, they were completely outmatched. But just as it seemed the tables had fully turned, one of the bikers reached into his jacket, and the crowd gasped, unsure of what would happen next. The diner fell silent as the biker reached into his jacket, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, his deputies tense and ready. Frank, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice firm and unwavering. "Son, whatever you are thinking, don't do it. Not here. Not today." The biker froze, his hand emerging from his jacket, but instead of a weapon, he held a battered photo. Confusion rippled through the crowd as he looked down at the image, his tough exterior crumbling. "My dad," he muttered, barely audible. He was a soldier too. His eyes darted to Frank, his bravado replaced by something almost like guilt. "You remind me of him." The sheriff relaxed slightly, though the tension remained. Frank stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Then honor him," he said softly. "Not by causing trouble, but by living a life he'd be proud of." The biker's crew looked on, unsure of what to do. Their leader hesitated, then slowly nodded, signaling for his men to back off. The sheriff gave Frank a knowing look as the bikers began to mount their motorcycles, their earlier confidence now replaced by quiet reflection. As they rode away, the crowd in the diner let out a collective breath. But just when it seemed everything was over, Frank turned to the sheriff with a sly smile. "By the way," he said, gesturing toward the parking lot, "their bikes are blocking the fire lane." The sheriff chuckled, signaling his deputies. Moments later, the sound of sirens echoed down the road as the bikers were stopped and fined, leaving Frank's quiet victory complete. As the sheriff and his deputies drove off, Frank returned to his seat in the diner, where the other patrons greeted him with nods of respect and admiration. The tension that had filled the room just moments ago was now replaced with a sense of calm. A waitress approached Frank, placing a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "On the house," she said with a smile. "You've earned it." Frank chuckled softly, his eyes glancing out the window where the last of the bikers had disappeared down the road. "Sometimes," he said, mostly to himself, "it's not about fighting. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to show a little mercy." The crowd in the diner slowly returned to their meals, but the story of the 94-year-old veteran who diffused a tense standoff spread quickly. For Frank, it wasn't about glory. It was about reminding everyone of the strength found in dignity and wisdom.